Film Theories, the dark truth of Disney magic.
Oh, so you thought putting 27 movies in a timeline was hard? You ain't seen nothing yet. Today we're putting more than 60 films into one cohesive timeline, creating the Disney theory to end them all. Hello, internets! Welcome to Film Theory, the show that always says, "Hey, theorists!" So, for as much as we get on them for the strange, often awful decisions they make, Disney has made a lot of great movies over the 100 years they've been around. Specifically, their animation is some of the most beloved in the world. There's a lot of genuine nostalgia for these stories, and I wondered, well, what if they were all part of the same story? What if there was one complete, cohesive Disney timeline of the Disney universe? The Disneyverse, if you will. Now, you may have seen this sort of idea around the internet before, specifically with the Pixar Theory. This was a fun project originally created by Negroni and picked up by fellow theorists like the SuperCarlinBrothers, trying to fit all of the Pixar movies into one complete timeline. It's a big challenge, and one that I really respect those creators for taking on. And I wanted to throw my hat into the ring with something similar. The Disney Theory, doing the same thing with all of Disney's movies. Matt had previously connected a handful of Disney movies with cameos and Easter eggs.
Thing is, some have humans and others don't. So how would you be able to put them into the same timeline when they shouldn't even be in the same reality? Multiverse? Anyway.
But I wanted to do them all, from Snow White to Moana 2. And it turned out much longer than I anticipated. Like, seriously, I was thinking this would be a special 25 to 30-minute video. And this turned into an epic that was over 45 minutes. So, yeah, this is a multi-part series with part 2 coming by the end of the month. So, okay, how are we going to be doing this? What are our rules? Like, most of Disney's movies are pretty ambiguous about when and where they take place, and putting them all together is gonna be a bit janky. But basically, we're going to be looking at all of the historical settings, landscapes, clothes, source material, cameos, and Easter eggs across all of the films to tie them together as best we can. And shoutouts to the awesome fan wikis and channel Mickeyology for being great resources for a lot of the information regarding all of that jazz. They were excellent starting points and just invaluable for us today. Regardless, the most important thing for us is to make sure that the main 62 films in the Disney canon fit in here. If you don't know, the Disney canon are the movies made specifically by Walt Disney Animation Studios. This is Disney's main animation studio that makes their tentpole, big-budget movies directly associated with the Disney brand. Just to be clear,
if you didn't have a Disney childhood, you did not have a childhood.
that doesn't include other studios they've owned, the likes of Pixar or Blue Sky Studios or Image Movers or whatever. Like, those are their own things, and maybe we'll get to them someday. For the most part, it also doesn't include works from Disney Toon Studios or Disney Television Animation. Those were the people behind the direct-to-video sequels or animated series spin-offs for the main Disney canon. That being said, sometimes these sequels and spin-offs will have details that will help us definitively place the movies or support the world that we're building here. In those cases, we'll be using them, but we will make sure to call that out. But again, the most important thing for this theory is getting those main 62 films placed. Those extras are just a nice bonus if they fit in too. Oh, and just one more thing while you're watching this, I want you to be thinking, who would win in a fight? Moana, Elsa from Frozen, or Rapunzel from Tangled?
I would give it to Elsa. Second place would be Rapunzel. I don't think I've seen Moana fight.
I think there's a good case for all three of them, but please leave your thoughts down in the comments below. If you think it's Moana, please make sure you use the word horizon in your comments. For Elsa, use glacier, and for Rapunzel, use toupee. They're on screen right now if you want to make sure that you get them right. Including the word assigned to the princess you think would win in your comment will help us tally up the results, and I'll let you know who wins in part 2. And hey, maybe we can turn this into a theory, a whole
two-part video.
Disney Princess Battle Royale. Honestly, it sounds hilarious, and I'm so down. But with all of that done and dusted, loyal theorists, let's get right into the magic. Okay, so right off the bat, there's a common thread that ties all of the movies in the Disney canon together, and it's a sprinkling of that Disney magic. No, I mean literally, Disney magic. The thing that distinguishes this universe apart from ours is magic, whether that be through talking animals or ghosts or just straight up wizards. So the first thing to do here is figure out, where does that magic come from? Well, the answer is simple. Stars. I'm talking wishing stars, shooting stars, magic from the sun, which is just a big old star. For whatever reason, in the Disneyverse, stars are inherently magical and can pass that magic along to whatever they touch. And that is, well, everything. See, in the real world, everything is made of star stuff, elements that were first created inside of stars. The same thing is happening here, just with magic alongside the science. As the corniest song in Wish put it, if you really want to know just who you are, you're a star. After the Big Bang and the formation of all these magic stars, the first thing we see is the Rite of Spring sequence from Fantasia, which shows us the formation of Earth and the development of life, leading up to the age of the dinosaurs. That naturally takes us to Disney's Dinosaur, set in the Cretaceous period at least 65 million years ago, when the
Who remembers dinosaurs? Because I watched the hell out of this.
dinosaurs would have existed alongside the ancestors of lemurs. But of course, the dinosaurs couldn't last forever, and just like in our universe, a meteor impacts the planet and kills them off. We actually see a lot of them die in that same Rite of Spring sequence in Fantasia. It's dark. But that wasn't the end of life on the planet, and in fact, the star magic would basically supercharge the rest of the life on Earth. In Fantasia 2000, the humpback whale sequence opens up with the star shining down on the ocean, and then the Northern Lights. This is a phenomenon caused by the Earth's magnetosphere interacting with the sun's light. The sun itself is just a...
I love how film theories, game theory, food theory, they always use science in their ways to explain things.
Star, so that makes the Northern Lights magic in this universe. And believe me, we'll get to that in a second. Regardless, this sets the stage for magic to spread across the skies, allowing those whales to take flight. We're dating this sequence back to 120,000 years ago, after humpback whales migrated to the pine tree-populated Northern Hemisphere, but before the most recent ice age fully set in. And along with these flying humpback whales, all of the magic also allows for the emergence of various creatures that are only legends in our world. Giants and dragons, nymphs and fairies, mermaids, and all manner of mythological beasts and supersized species. Additionally, it left many animals capable of understanding human speech, and gifted some with the ability to speak, though that doesn't really become relevant until much, much later. This brings us to the dawn of human civilization, with the rise of Atlantis around 13,000 BC, as seen in Atlantis: The Lost Empire. Just to put that into perspective, that would have been during the last ice age. The technology of Atlantis was driven by magic crystals above the city, which were conspicuously compared to stars.
Right?
It all ties back in with the stars.
Light, like a star, floating above the city.
Further proof that magic comes from stars in this world. However, as the Atlantean Empire thrived, other less advanced human civilizations were also popping up across the world, each with their own relationship with this star magic. For instance, we have Brother Bear, set in what is now Alaska, around 9,500 BC. We can place it there since it takes place in that sweet spot between the last ice age wrapping up, but before the extinction of the Columbian mammoth. In the film, we once again see traces of magic from the stars in the Northern Lights.
I just remember they not counting Ice Age because I was about to comment about it.
Told you we'd be getting back to that one. And in Brother Bear, we see this magic has the power to interact with both human and animal spirits, literally transforming Kenai into a bear. Across the planet, humans start recognizing the power of magic and sought to bottle it up and harness it for themselves. Sometimes they did this in literal bottles. This gave rise to races of magical beings like the genies, concentrated personifications of that wishing magic. Unfortunately, we know from the Aladdin animated series that genies were later hunted to near extinction.
That's actually dark.
Perhaps due to some backlash against magic, considering the devastation that could occur if it fell into the wrong hands. Only a few survivors, like Aladdin's genie, were spared and hidden away in places like the Cave of Wonders. We can actually clock Genie's imprisonment starting in 8600 BC, since
10,000 years will give you such a crick in the neck!
And we know that Aladdin takes place in 1400 AD. We'll get there, I promise.
You see how the dates are just matching up? Now that's fine.
And here is where we get to the most pivotal point in the early Disneyverse, the year 7000 BC and the fall of Atlantis, as seen in that movie's prologue. Using their magically fueled technology, Atlantis accidentally nuked the whole planet and created a giant tidal wave. Whoopsie! This led to the sinking of Atlantis and a great flood that hit the entire planet, as referenced by Milo and Kida later in the movie.
Such knowledge has been lost to us since the time of the Maybermok.
Oh, the Great Flood.
This is also where the Noah's Ark sequence from Fantasia 2000
I was literally thinking that exact same thing.
would fit in, where we see Noah save the animals and ferry them to the only sliver of land that's not completely submerged. So that's good news for Noah and his animals, but what about the rest of humanity? Kind of hard to come back from the whole world getting flooded, isn't it? Well, thankfully, there were parts of civilization like Avalonia from Strange World that were able to survive on the backs of giant turtles. Yeah, really. These were likely created by the magic that brought back life after the dinosaurs, and we see in Strange World that they're using the flooded planet as their own personal swimming pool. And believe it or not, but this isn't even the only example of this we see.
Now I'm thinking about the turtle in Pennywise. Or should I call it?
In the Disney canon. In the direct-to-video sequel Aladdin and the King of Thieves, the gang discover the remnants of an ancient civilization built on the back of a giant turtle. Sound familiar? That's just further proof that humans were forced to resettle on the backs of these giant turtles until the continents re-emerged. Oh, and just as a little bonus here, we actually have a direct connection between Atlantis and Strange World. We see an Atlantean book written in its distinctive language at the end of Strange World, suggesting that the fall of Atlantis was studied by the surviving humans. However, eventually, Avalonia would have been flooded again as the giant turtles died, or just decided to go back underwater. They got a little divine intervention from some very powerful individuals, thus beginning Disney's Age of the Gods. Yeah, at this point, higher powers swoop in to reshape the world and fix the mess left behind by Atlantis. The first to step up is Tafiti, who raised the land from the ocean and unflooded the...
Damn, how is he able to tie all of this together though?
Planet.
In the beginning, there was only ocean until the mother island emerged.
But Tafiti was only one such powerful being. There were others, including the Titans and other giant monsters like Tamatoa, who brought chaos to the world, earthquakes and volcanoes that never slept. Enter other pantheons like the Greek gods, who imprisoned the Titans and monsters beneath the seas to help humanity thrive.
Everything's so tied together.
These prisons became small worlds unto themselves, like Lalotai in Moana and Wonderland in Alice in Wonderland. Even some powerful mortal sorcerers were imprisoned in similar worlds or trapped in items like cauldrons.
The gods feared him. Since no prison could hold him, he was thrown alive into a crucible of molten iron.
Dang, man, Zeus don't mess around. Regardless, only creatures that could feasibly coexist with humans were allowed to hang around. Dragons and mermaids were left off the hook, as were certain demigods like Maui, who set humanity up for success by taming nature. Speaking of demigods, this actually leads us to the story of Hercules, set in 1000 BC. We know this thanks to a date we can see on a credit card.
Am I the only one who didn't like the character Hercules? I love the film or the movie, but I just didn't like Hercules.
In the movie. Guess all that wish magic also got capitalism a jumpstart in this timeline. This film also shows us that gods are still running the show, since we see the Greek pantheon and Hercules almost ascend to become one of them. Oh, and just before we move on, Hercules also lets us place the Lion King and all of its ancestor star magic roughly at the same time. See, one of the famous labors of Hercules in Greek myth to prove that he was a hero was killing the Nemean lion, a beast that was terrorizing the town of Nemea. Well, in the Disney movie, we see Hercules wearing a lion pelt that is identical to Scar. So somehow Scar survived being attacked by the hyenas in The Lion King.
Now that's insane.
Made his way up to Greece and was
And it would make sense because in like lion prides, once you lose, you're banished. So he would have made his way to a different area.
Eventually defeated by Hercules. And just to get it out of the way, yes, the Timon and Pumbaa series features those two in the modern day, but those aren't the same Timon and Pumbaa from the movie universe. Timon in the films has 5 stripes on his back, but only 3 in the show. So
damn, this is like the Five Nights at Freddy's toes or number of fingers.
It's non-canon or some weird alternate universe, but enough about that, let's get back to the Disney gods. Something happened that drove the gods away, or made them take a hands-off approach moving forward. And that thing was the Droon from Raya and the Last Dragon. In the year 800 BC, dark entities known as the Droon spread across the world with the power to turn any creature into stone. And though you might not be able to kill a god, you can trap them forever on a rock. So how can we put this at 800 BC? Well, we know that the Droon rose to power 500 years before the main events of Raya.
Well, that all began 500 years ago.
And given the presence of iron weapons and crossbows in the main story, we can estimate that Raya is set around 300 BC, so 500 years before that would make this 800 BC. Regardless, after the gods left, magical beings called dragons defeated the Droon in the fictional Southeast Asian subcontinent of Kumandra, though they were themselves
And the dragons weren't trapped by the gods.
trapped in stone. 500 years later, the Droon were released once again during the main events of Raya before being defeated once and for all. With the Droon finally gone for good, humanity once again thrives. Though Polynesia suffers after the demigod Maui steals the heart of Te Fiti and triggers a slowly encroaching wave of darkness that drains life from the islands across the Pacific. Don't worry, we'll get back to that story shortly, but first we have to take a brief pit stop in Europe. Here we have the Black Cauldron. Yeah, I bet you forgot about this one. Honestly, I thought that this one was
I do not remember this.
going to be a challenge since it takes place in a fantasy world known as Prydain, until I dug into it and discovered that Prydain is just another name for the country of Wales in Great Britain, thus setting it firmly on Earth. Anyway, this film has to take place around the 500s AD since the helmet that Taran imagines himself wearing resembles a Spangen helm, a real type of helmet popular during this century. Likewise, this leads us directly into the Sword in the Stone, set just a slight jaunt away in 500s England. Here, King Arthur rises to power to become a legendary hero under the tutelage of the mage Merlin. This is the date range typically given for Arthurian legend, which more or less lines up with what we see in the film. We're also going to set the famous Sorcerer's Apprentice story from Fantasia here, which sees the sorcerer Yen Sid and his apprentice, a strange humanoid mouse creature named Mickey. These animal-human hybrids will become much more common later on in the timeline and are likely the result of star magic.
Didn't we also see them in the Great Flood? So they would technically have been around before this time? But okay.
Really fast-tracking evolution of other species. Anyway, we're placing this here because of the similarity between Yen Sid and Merlin's attire, and the similar use of magic. That's not to say they're the same character, but they are clearly peers. And now, back to the Pacific to round out the first millennium. We have Moana and Moana 2. These are set in Polynesia during the 900s, and we can chalk this date up to some real-world history. See, Moana's story unfolds during a period called the Long Pause. This was a time when the exploration of the ocean by the Polynesian peoples stalled for over 1,000 years and ended in the 10th century. Well, in the Disneyverse, this came to an end thanks to Moana's adventure to Te Fiti, which reignites the desire to explore in her people. What's up, guys? Future Lee here. I just saw Moana 2 and wanted to talk about how it impacts the timeline. Mostly, it doesn't. There was a joke in this movie where Maui said that the gods may have butt-dialed Moana, and no one knew what he was talking about, but that it would make sense in about 2,000 years. At first, that concerned me because, hey, that doesn't line up with present day, especially if this is set in like 900 AD. But there are multiple other instances where it does line up with that timeline of about 900 AD. The last Tautai before Moana is said to have been about 1,000 years ago, which lines up with the Great Pause. And likewise, Matangi, the Bat Lady, was trapped in that giant clam for 1,000 years.
Now, I haven't actually watched Moana 2 yet, but I'm getting on that.
Again, all of that lines up with the Great Pause, so we're going to say that Dwayne Johnson just ad-libbed that line, and we're going to leave it at that. This then gets us to the start of a new millennium, and before we go further here, I have to make a note. Not every kingdom depicted in the Disney universe has a great real-world analog. Like, some of them might have been one of the thousands of small petty kingdoms that popped up around Europe in the Middle Ages before merging or getting eaten up by a larger kingdom or nation, but in the Disneyverse, it seems like plenty of these lands continued to dot the map as independent states for a prolonged period, at least up until the 20th century. For example, according to Disney, Wish is set in the 1200s off the southern coast of Spain. If I were to guess, it takes place on Ibiza, or a similar island in the Mediterranean, allowing for travelers from all over Europe and Africa to find their way there. That would also make it a prime candidate to spread parts of its culture across the region, and why we see so many early versions of classic fairy tale stuff like fairy godmothers and magic mirrors in Wish before they pop up in other European stories. Like Like, for instance, Sleeping Beauty. Thankfully, this one is easy. It takes place within the borders of what is now France in the 1300s.
Now, Father, you're living in the past. This is the 14th century.
Gotta love when
Animations where they give the date makes things easier for the man.
they make it easy. And also, shoutouts to Maleficent, who is one of the many dark wizards who seems to be taking advantage of the darker side of the star magic. From here, things start to get busy. Particularly, the 1400s were huge for our Disney timeline. First up, we have The Emperor's New Groove, set in Peru during the era of the Incan Empire. So we're gonna plop this one in the early 1400s. We also get another example of magic in this world, transforming a human into an animal, which is just very much a recurring theme in the Disneyverse. Next up, we have one of my personal faves, Mulan, set in China, and we can actually determine the exact year this takes place in. See, despite the legend dating back all the way to the 400s AD here in the real world, the Disneyverse Mulan takes place much later, since we see both the Great Wall of China and the Imperial Palace, the latter of which wasn't completed.
These real-life representations also narrow the search down very much.
Until around 1420 AD. Then, in Mulan 2, we see a calendar that dates the film to the year of the Fire Ox. That only occurs once every 60 years, and the first year of the Fire Ox after the completion of the Imperial Palace was in 1457. Also worth noting that the Fa family guardians like Mushu were dragons trapped in stone, very similar to the dragons we saw in Raya. Perhaps the Droon had an impact here in China as well. Regardless, we can actually use the Imperial Palace to place Aladdin around the same time, since he and Jasmine finished their whole new world date by watching fireworks over the Imperial Palace in the Forbidden City. Now, before you say anything, I know there's a popular theory out there that suggests that Aladdin takes place in the far future, since Genie makes a ton of modern pop culture references despite being locked up in the lamp for 10,000 years.
They could also have just been Disney's way of making things flashy.
But this isn't the case, and those timey-wimey references can actually be explained thanks to the Aladdin animated series. See, in one episode, Aladdin and his friends travel back in time to the founding of Agrabah. Here, the mystical sands of time are spilled onto the site where the city would be founded, and Genie ends up bottling up some of the time travel magic for himself to use whenever he wants. This might be a bit weird and
I haven't seen the animated series, but that makes a lot of sense.
Retroactive, but this is likely how his past self knew about all of those modern references. Time travel is just super confusing, man. Those sands of time might also explain how crossover episodes like the one we see between Aladdin and Hercules can happen, despite those two movies being separated by thousands of years. Just wild stuff. Besides, Genie isn't even the first to do this. All the way back in The Sword and the Stone, Merlin used to take vacations in the 21st century on a regular basis. And finally, rounding out the 1400s, we can hop back over to France where we see the events of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. If this is anything like the Victor Hugo novel it's based on, that means it's set in the year 1482. And it also shows us another example of star magic bringing things to life, like with the gargoyles. Oh, and before you call out that Beauty and the Beast should fall here because we see a woman who looks like Belle cameo in this movie, it can't. There are other factors in Beauty and the Beast that place it later on. But both of these movies are set in France. Perhaps this is an ancestor of Belle's who just happens to look a lot like her. And now, probably 10 plus minutes into our timeline here, we finally get to the very first Disney animated film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, using where the original fairy tale.
I think that if you've watched Disney animation films, there's no way you haven't seen Snow White.
Originated, as well as the aesthetic look of the era and the use of minecart technology, we can place this firmly in what is now Germany in the 1500s. Then there's Pocahontas, set in Virginia during 1607. That's literally spelled out for us in the first few lyrics of the film.
Getting real close to the modern
Again, love when they make it easy and somewhat consistent with real-world history, even if the rest of the film isn't at all. Though, again, this movie does show us the long-term impacts of the star magic on the nature of the Disneyverse, with elemental forces like wind and trees literally being alive in this world. Anyway, this leads up into Beauty and the Beast, which is set in France during the mid to late 1700s. We know this thanks to the aesthetic look of the era and Cogsworth referencing Rococo architecture, which prominently emerged in the 1730s. We actually covered when and where this takes place in an old episode of Food Theory, so go check that out. Just a few decades later, we have the Legend of Sleepy Hollow segment from The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. This is Disney's version of the Headless Horseman.
I don't think I've watched it.
story. It's based on another real-world book by Washington Irving set in 1790. Nothing contradicts that in the movie, so that's where we're gonna put it. Similarly, we can put The Legend of Johnny Appleseed from Melody Time in the early 1800s. That movie's hero was based on a real person from around that same time. Jumping back to Europe, and something much more made up, we have Tangled and all of its various spin-off series and shorts. This whole little mini-franchise was kicked off by a bit of that star magic giving healing powers to a...
I think I watched all of Tangled. The animated series, the movie. I think I watched everything. I'm not sure, but I think I have.
Flower.
A single drop of sunlight fell from the heavens, and from this small drop of sun grew a magic golden flower.
Regardless, this is set in the fictional France-adjacent kingdom of Corona in the late 1830s or early 1840s. How do we know that? Well, the animators researched fashion from that time frame while making the film. Plus, we know that Rapunzel and Eugene attend Elsa's coronation at the end of Frozen, and we know when that film takes place. Speaking of which, we know that Frozen and all of its nature ice magic is set in the small Scandinavian kingdom of Arendelle in what is now modern-day Norway, exactly in the year 1843. That date we have thanks to a map dated 1840 that Anna and Elsa's parents had on their ship when it sank. And given that there's a 3-year time gap between that tragedy and the events of Frozen, it's just basic math. Similarly, Frozen 2 is set 3 years after the first film, landing it in 1846. Jumping forward a couple of decades, we have Alice in Wonderland, which sees Alice exploring one of these strange prison worlds originally created by the Disney gods at the start of the whole timeline. A lot of weird stuff has been allowed to evolve here on its own, thus the Cheshire Cat, Card Kingdom, etc., etc. Like Sleepy Hollow, Alice in Wonderland is based on a real book by Lewis Carroll, which took place in the 1860s. Unfortunately, not every movie is going to have a dated map or be based on a real book. For example, there's the Pecco Spill segment from Melody Time, based on the American cowboy folk hero. To date this one, beyond just Old West times, we had to take a look at the clothes. Specifically, how one character is shown wearing a bustle. This was a part of a dress meant to push up the rear of the skirt and became a prominent part of American and British fashion in the 1870s. That lines up with the real-world legend of Pecos Bill, so that's where we're going to be planting this one. Similarly, bustles also show up in Cinderella, which places that movie in the 1870s, and the landscape of the kingdom shown in the
See how everything is just lining up nicely?
film resembles the real-world region of Occitania in southern France, which tracks for the location. Also worth noting that this movie has yet another appearance of a wish-granting magical being like the genie and the fairy godmother, and small sentient talking critters like the mice, further showing the impact star magic has had on the Disneyverse and just how different it is from our world. But another important thing that Cinderella does for us, it lets us place exactly where the Little Mermaid goes on our timeline. Here, let me explain. We know that the movie takes place on Prince Eric's Island Kingdom, set in the Mediterranean, likely near the real-world island of Corsica. This would explain the various characters and visual influences from nearby European cultures like Britain, Italy, and France.
Nice young ladies just don't swim around rescuing people in the middle of the ocean.
Oh, you're gonna love it. Chef's been fixing his specialty, stuffed crab.
Les poissons, how I love les poissons!
But the thing that really cements this time and place and why it's connected to Cinderella? Well, the king and the Grand Duke from Cinderella are shown attending Eric's wedding to Ursula, which was put together in less than a day. So Eric's kingdom would have to be close enough to southern France for them to make it to the ceremony on time. Corsica was even connected to France by telegraph by the year 1870, allowing for quick messages to make it to the characters of Cinderella. Plus, in Cinderella 2, Dreams Come True, the king and the Grand Duke rush off, explaining,
We have important matters of state to attend to.
important matters of state. Perhaps like a royal wedding? They
Nice. It's really blending well.
even pack up a ton of just random valuables, likely wedding gifts they had to get on a quick turnaround. And they return just 2 days later. All of it just fits. And just to dot our I's and cross our T's, the direct-to-video sequel, The Little Mermaid 2: Return to the Sea, references the opera singer Enrico Caruso.
When I was a teenager, I had this high, squeaky voice. And then one day, I sound like Caruso.
Caruso's career began in the 1890s, so the first film being set in the 1870s would allow for Eric and Ariel to marry, enjoy life a bit, and then have a preteen daughter by the 1890s. Now, that took a bit of maneuvering to figure out, but something that's much easier for us maneuvering to figure out, but something that's much easier for us, Home on the Range, which was set in the American Old West in 1889. The movie straight up lays this out for us thanks to a date listed on a deed. I love it when they make it just stupid easy for us, even if it's a stupid cow movie. Another easy one for us that is remarkably less stupid and cow adjacent is The Jungle Book, set in India during the 1890s. We know this since that's the year that Rudyard Kipling's original book was published, and it's backed up by a line in the movie. It's the decade following Colonel Hatti's service as a war elephant, which he references in this line.
Back in '88, it was, what was it?
So, believe it or not, but placing most of these movies was actually easy compared to what we see in the rest of the films. Like, for real, how on earth do you figure out where Robin Hood, Chicken Little, and Zootopia go? How do you possibly go from what's in Lilo and Stitch to what we see in Treasure Planet? And Disney, the company, straight up exists in Wreck-It Ralph. How does that work? Well, loyal theorists, we figured all of that out and more, and if you want to find out how, you'll need to subscribe for part 2 when it comes out later this month. Don't forget to leave a comment with the code word for the princess you think would win in a fight, but for...
Okay, that's... Wait, let me check. Okay, that's basically the video. Honestly, I'm excited for part 2. I want to see how all the other strange Disney films fit in.